you guys if you want later.
Maybe you could let Demetrius have a copy of the file and
Yeah.
you can put it online.
Yeah. So, anyway, welcome. I'm Steve. Been introduced already. Do run SIV, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I want to make you guys a bit safer and not need to deal with paraglider instability. Let's go this way. There's no point anyway. Just use it as an aid memoir. Right, so I'm here to talk about paraglider instability. What's going to go wrong with your glider, etc. First of all, trim. A well-trimmed glider is safer. It's not safe by any stretch of the imagination, but it's safer. Make sure you keep your gliders in trim. What they are is a bit less granular. So yeah, trim it at least once a year, or if you notice anything strange, often they'll start hanging back on launch, get a bit more tricky to launch. You will find that a nicely trimmed glider is possibly more prone to collapsing than a very out-of-trimmed glider. But what it will do is it's more likely to recover to normal flight, whereas if it's very out-trimmed, it's more likely to drop into a stall or spin or something. It's gone. It used to be there. What else is important to offline? Obviously the harness, it needs to be set up and set to within manufacturer's tolerance, so you don't want massively wide open waist straps. Equally, you don't want your waist straps super tight. If it's too small, you lose that yaw connection with the glider, and then if the glider shoots off one way, you'll end up getting line twists. With it set very wide, you're also likely to get line twists. Because as you roll into, say, a collapse, you bring your risers and lines together. So again, you've lost that coupling with the wing. So you use the harness settings that are recommended or thereabouts. Reserves. Repack your reserve frequently. Most manufacturers specify a 1 year minimum repack interval, but I can assure you that that's going to give you something like a minute before it opens. They're not that bad. If you've literally just packed it and it's this lovely fluffy bunch of cloth, as soon as you get it out of the pack, it's just going to fall open. If it's down to a year old, sometimes we get them like biscuits you have to peel apart. So it's very worth getting a repacking reserve frequently. I'm not saying go and spend money getting somebody else to do it. We actually much prefer that you maybe go to one of the repack events, maybe go get your reserve repacked, buy a packer on another occasion, and you ghost them, you do it with them. And usually one or two of the repacks, and you should be confident enough repacking your own parachute. Obviously if you change harness, then you might want to get someone to help you go over it again. But yeah, once you can do it yourself comfortably, do it frequently. I would recommend 3 monthly. I know it seems really, really silly, but it's just going to make a big difference. Hard deck. When we're doing SIV, we set a hard deck. We say, right, you're going to stop doing silliness below a certain height. When you're actually flying, you should establish your own personal hard deck, below which you're going to stop messing around, or if you're in an unstable situation, you're going to give up and deploy your parachute. And I would recommend no less than 500 feet, and maybe 1,000 feet if you're cascading. So, if something goes wrong at 500 feet, it recovers, fine. If something goes wrong and it's getting worse and something else is happening, then really when you get to 1,000 feet, it's time to give up, throw the parachute. Pilots are often at their most comfortable at the most dangerous altitude. What would you guys say is the most dangerous altitude? Anybody?
About 100 feet.
Yeah, that sort of 10 to 40 metre bracket. Too low to comfortably throw your parachute and too high to comfortably land. So if you're in that danger zone, get out of it. Either get closer, so that if you have a collapse you just go straight down to the ground, or preferably get a lot higher. Now we say 40 metres. In reality, that's all about parachute certification. Parachutes are supposed to open within 40 metres. And that's the old PDAs. The new triangles and squares and such like will open a lot less than that, maybe half that. They will open you don't have to be 40 metres above the ground for them to actually work. When they do the testing, they literally just throw it off a bridge, drops down, and it has to open before it hits the ground. Because you're moving when you throw your parachute, be it along in a straight line or more often spiralling around, when you throw it, about a quarter of a turn and the parachute has described that 40 metres or less that it needs. So you might be 20 metres up, have an event, start to spiral, you're quick on the draw and get your parachute out, and it could well save your life. Even as low as 10 metres if you're out to the side. Throwing it could make a big difference. So never ignore the parachute. Don't carry it for your entire flying career and then carry it to the scene of the crash. Never too low to throw. Okay, everybody clear on that? All right, there's a whole bunch of manoeuvres and things that we're going to go through, not necessarily in this order, in fact definitely not in this order. Asymmetric deflations, symmetrical deflations, cravats, big ears, bunny ears, beeline stall, spiral dive, Swiss spiral, might go into the satted spiral, full stall, stall and spin, and stall spin, spin and stall exit from spin, wing overs, pitch-induced deflations, and turn reversals. So, first of all, we look at descent techniques, things that you're going to want to use yourself. So, an old rapid descent technique you may have seen, I kept this in just in case Carlo was here, because he did one once with very funny results for everybody else. The A-line stall or the front rosette is a very dated technique. We don't see it very often. I don't recommend you do it. But if you actually...
the A-line what?
A-line stall or front rosette. Front rosette. It's a very dated technique. Basically, what you do is you reach up and you take your inner A-lines. And I'm kind of telling you this not because, it's a great technique, but telling you what's going to happen when you pull the wrong string and you pull the inner A-lines. So you pull the inner A-lines, the front of the glider collapses, the tips then come together, and the glider drops vertically. That's the theory. In practice, what we've seen happen, and it's all span dependent and such like that, what we've seen happen is one wing comes around to here, the other wing comes around to here, so they overlap to each other, and then it spins like you wouldn't believe. Really, really quick rotation. Usually, just letting go, it should recover. Should. Where we are seeing this being used again are by the tandem pilots in Annecy. But they're using a very particular variant of it, and if we can get it full detail out of things to how they're doing it, that would be good. Basically, they're pulling down the inner A's to create the deflated central section, the non-functioning, non-lifting central section, and they're keeping a bit of breaker on, which in turn stops the tips from coming forwards. And probably what they're doing is just maybe taking a ramp, bringing the ones forwards, whatever. We haven't really sussed it yet. What that generates is the centre section of the glider is actually flying down. It's generating lift in a downwards direction. The two tips are functioning to keep the thing open, and you get a very good sink rate. It's a new manoeuvre, so if you're ever around, watch the tandem, see if you can figure out what they're up to.
I'm sorry, I can't hear against the television. Should I go and ask? Is that all right, do you think?
It's worth a try, yeah. Sorry, I can't shout very loud.
What kind of sink rate will that technique give you? Roughly, ballpark?
Ballpark, 3 or 4 metres a second.
Okay.
Something like that. But it keeps forward speed, that's the nice thing.
Could it be used as a parachute? If you had, if your reserve fails, could you use it as a parachuting technique?
Well, you can put it into a parachutal stall, but they're not really big enough. So typically they will start to go faster and faster. So I wouldn't, if you can get it to the point where you can get the glider into this quite complex situation, you could probably got it flying again.
Right. I've got the silly question out of the way, thank you.
Quite nice. But yeah, it's a strange manoeuvre. Basically, you just let go and it should come out. If you full front rosette, usually just letting go works. Otherwise, sometimes you have to give it a big pump and release on the brakes to bring the tips back out. Be prepared to damp the dive. The dive could be quite aggressive. Anyway, that's old and strange things. more typically, things like beeline stalls you might be interested in doing. Who has done a beeline stall? Robin, anybody else? No. Robin, how physical was the beeline stall?
You have to pull pretty hard.
You have to pull pretty hard, but beyond that, once you're in...
Once you're in, it's fine, and you end up in basically a parachutable stall.
Yeah.
Brings the centre of the wing down, so it narrows its span.
This way.
And when you let go, it should pop out.
Yeah.
If you don't push the A's, and it will...
Yeah. So, yeah, what do we do? Reach up, hands upside down, take your B lines just above the risers, and then a chin up, twisting out and down as you come down. You'll find it's very physical to start with, and you're pulling and pulling, thinking, this is never going to go, this is never going to go, I'm lifting myself out of the seat, and then suddenly the glider's slowed down just enough that the amount of force you're putting on it is enough to break the back of the wing, and it drops back. And you think, ooh, that's interesting, and you drop back with it. From there, you can then pull down further, and on some gliders you just keep going, pulling down, pulling down. But typically you'll get to a certain point and the glider starts to snake. So if that happens, just ease up a bit. From the initial beeline stall, you're probably getting about 3 meters a second. You can probably push that, or you can push that on some gliders to about 9 meters a second. So it's quite an effective descent rate, and it has no, beyond hanging on with your arms, has no real physiological effect on the pilot. You're not being spun around like you're on a spiral dive or anything, so you can see where you're going. To recover a beeline stall, just let go. Either literally let go or push your hands up quickly. Do not be tempted to lower your hands, to raise your hands gently, because if you do that, you're more than likely going to initiate deep stall, especially if the glider is a little bit out of trim. So it's a very easy manoeuvre. On most gliders, it's a very benign manoeuvre. ENC and above is when it can get snotty. They can start snaking around. So you've just got to try it and see from a very safe environment height, very high.
Right, Steve, that certain DNAs in the manual they recommend you don't do beeline
Yes,
stalls.
they do recommend on a number of gliders that you shouldn't do beeline stalls because it can potentially structurally damage the glider, especially if you're habitually doing it. I'm not aware of any glider having been damaged by a beeline stall. It's in the manual. But they were they're certified to do it. Check with your own, whenever you're buying a new glider, whatever, look at the test certificate for it. What tests did it do? And if it did a beeline stall, then you know it can do a beeline stall. If it says beeline stall not available, so it's an Enzo or something, then obviously it's not something you want to be doing.
Yeah, not something for a two-liner.
Funnily enough, it is something we do in a two-liner,
Oh, really?
but it has a very different outcome. It's effectively it's a full stall done on the back risers rather than a beeline stall. It's a bit more benign than doing it on brakes, to be honest. So why might you do a beeline stall?
Cloud sight to lose height.
Cloud sight to lose height. It's only got a descent rate of up to 9 meters a second. In a spiral dive, you should be able to get, even quite an inexperienced pilot ought to be able to get into the teens, low teens, and a very experienced pilot ought to be getting into the 20s meters a second descent rate. So, what's the contraindication for not spiral diving? What are they? What could they be?
Being in cloud-close terrain?
Got it in one. That's the biggie. So it's physiological on the pilot, and the other one is if you're in a stuffed cloud. If you're in a cloud with a mountain in it, the last thing you want to be doing is 120 kilometres an hour around the spiral, around the helix, in case you suddenly happen upon a tree or a rock, or a mountain goat. If you're in a stuffed cloud, beeline stall is the safest way to get down. Flying out the side of the cloud is the safest way, but often that doesn't work.
How does the descent rate of beeline compare with just big ears?
Big ears and full bar is probably slightly better than the initial beeline stall, but it is a bit of glider dependency there. There's a bit of crossover, I would say, but usually you can go let's go down a bit faster. Thank you very much. And get it to go down very quickly. most gliders will recover beeline very, very quickly in a very benign manner. You let go of the lines as it nods forwards a little bit, flies away. Every now and then you'll get a glider that's a complete mare. I had an E&A wing, brand new design, and you beeline stall it, release the beelines, and the sync rate would just keep accelerating away. And it would get to about 12 metres a second. And the only way you would get it flying again was put your hands right behind the aerorisers and push all the way down here, so you're really bringing the nose of the wing down. So if you've done a beeline stall, the glider to start flying again, release quickly. If it starts flying, great. If it doesn't start flying, first of all, did you release quickly? If you didn't, go down and let go. Try and initiate that dive. It's a small dive.
I've got a question, please.
Go on.
Pushing on the A's like that, is that the same thing as like hitting the speed bar?
Yes.
So either one will do it?
Either one will do it, and if your foot's on the bar, great, push the bar. But you may well find that's not enough. The one glider I've had that happening on sort of predictably, and literally you were down to the carabiners before it would start flying again. It's a lot further than expected.
Steve, question. It sounds as though unless you've actually done a beeline stall on your own glider, that you'd have to have a situation of kind of some emergency that you wanted a drop height to do it. Otherwise, you'd be better off
flying the glider. Always, it's a stall. It's a stall. So always flying the glider is better. So spiral diving, so long as you can physiologically cope with it, is that you're going to be able to fly out of spiral dive. Any stall, there's always a random element of, well, if I let go, is it going to fly, or is it going to do something abnormal?
So if the big ears plus bar gives you a similar, broadly similar descent rate, isn't it easy just to do that while you...
Possibly, but if you're in a big stuffed mountain, you've lost orientation. That's the issue. That's where it's really useful. It's when you've lost what's going on. Or if it's very bumpy. That's another one.
Sorry, go back another question. If you've got a beeline stall compared with big ears and bar, is your glide ratio, you're going to come down more vertically on a beeline rather than glide path?
Yes, you've not got carrying any forward
momentum, so that's why it's better in terrain.
If you've got no visibility, beeline on, and you've got 50-50, when you start to see the terrain, you're either going to be facing it or away from it.
Does it still react to the weight shift? If you want to just...
Not really, but they do tend to react a little bit to pulling more or less. Again, it's glider dependent. You've just got to try and...
I hope the Delta works.
Say again?
I hope the Delta 3 works.
No, the question being, does it turn? And some do, some don't.
Install on that, I'm just hoping the Delta 3 will do that. Never done it.
I'm quite sure it will be on stall. Whether it will snake like a complete monster is another story.
Have you not done it? Can I get you to test it?
I haven't done that. I'm trying to remember if we have had a Delta 3 on. We've certainly had Deltas on and they do it fine. They don't snake all over the place. But you can never be sure. It's always, different weights, etc. These can go.
Steve, in order to familiarise yourself with, would you recommend only doing it in an SIV training situation rather than just exploring? Can you
in an emergency,
push it into a beeline stall?
Other than in an emergency, yes. But if you're in a cloud and you've tried to fly out and now you haven't got the foggiest where you are, but you know there's a mountain in there, it's a way out. So yes, it's definitely better by a country mile to have done it in a controlled environment of an SIV course. But if push comes to shove, it's a tool in the box. Right. Certainly I'd done my first beeline stall long before I went on an SIV course. Just in the wild here. But we can get 5,000
and survived, clearly.
I have one more question. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, one second. There's one more important thing about a beeline stall is when you're covering it, don't damp the dive. Okay, you've got to let it dive. It's got to dive to about there. Obviously, if it's getting to here, you can damp that. But if you damp the dive, it will just drop back into stall. And that's where people do end up getting themselves into stalls and such like, is they go, oh, they let go, they go, oh, and stop it. And the next thing you know is it doesn't want to fly.
That's what happened to Phil Essinger.
Yeah.
He had a Cascade and he's just damping it too soon.
Yeah, damping it full stop.
Yeah.
It's seeing a few videos of that particular behaviour that's why I've said I'll come and do this chat. Because I want to get people to, more than anything else, just let the damn thing fly, put your hands up, let it fly.
The question I wanted to ask was about spiral dive.
Oh, we'll get to spiral dives later. So you can ask that when we talk about spiral dives.
Yeah, sorry. It's too exciting.
Yes. Why are you excited? Why are you excited? It's meant to be boring.
Yeah. You told me boring. I'm disappointed. I'm not believe that.
Before you move on, right in your opening comment about trim, can I just clarify what you mean by make sure your glide is trim? You're talking about service and line lengths and everything.
Yes. And porosity as well.
Yeah.
And check that the ribs aren't stretched to billion. If you've been doing acro on it or something, you're going to ruin it in no time flat. So the next sensible descent technique, and the one that most of you are most likely to use, big ears. With big ears, first of all, find your speed bar. This has become more and more relevant. Back in the day, we'd just pop the big ears in. Nowadays, no, give it a bit of speed. So find your speed bar, don't push it yet. Then look up and find your outermost A line. You will all have done this in the school, but you'd be horrified the number of people that, when we take SIV courses, the number of people that pull the outer back riser or outer back line and stall the glider is horrific. So find your outer front line. Usually nowadays it's on a separate baby A riser. Sometimes it's even got big ears written on it. Let go of any wraps you may have. Initially keep hold of the brakes and reach up as high as you can, both sides. Get the lines, thumbs down again, palms outwards. Pull in one, pull in t'other. Make sure that you're not pulling it down so far that you're pulling brake, because that's a very good way of stalling the glider. Practically everyone I've seen that's stalled the glider in big ears has done so because they pulled their hands, they've not reached high enough, they pulled their hand out and they finally got 18 inches of brake on. 10 inches will do it. So reach as high as you can, pull down, make sure you're not applying any brake. Once you've got the big ears in, then you can give it some bar. At least half bar I'd recommend. Why? Because when you put the big ears in, you're creating drag which is slowing it down. You're creating less lift, but you're not changing the attitude of the wing. So it's going slower, it's going down faster, no attitude will change, so the angle of attack is being increased. So by giving it a bit of speed, you're reducing the angle of attack again, bringing it back closer to normal, so that the glider is less likely to stall. If it's out of trim, or if it's getting rains on it, it may well stall. Now, a glider that's wet isn't necessarily going to stall, so long as it's wetted out. The gliders that stall when they get wet are ones where it's beading up on the top, either beading up or forming these big runnels across the top of the wing. That's disturbing the airflow, and that's going to make it stall. So strangely, it's more of an issue the newer your glider is. If you've got a ragged out thing, it's not likely to be such a problem.
Good question on. Sorry.
Here you go.
Great, yeah. But you advocate doing one ear at a time.
Yes.
Other people advocate doing both together.
Yeah.
What's the pros and cons?
The pros and cons are, we are in the UK, we are usually flying a bit close to the ground. And it's much better to pull one wrong string than two wrong strings. The number of times I've seen people pull the wrong string, when they're in an actual high stress situation, they go, oh, I've got to be line, and they take the wrong line and pull the back riser. Doesn't bear thinking about. Usually, actually, the gliders stall quite nicely. They go, oh, that was wrong, let go, and it flies away again. But there's always going to come the day that that doesn't happen. So yeah, UK style we go one, oh, it's still flying, two, great. Continentals will let go of the brakes, pop them on the poppers, reach up and do two big ears. That does stop you pulling brake when you're big earing, which is good. And if you're too short to not pull brake, so it might be that you reach up as high as you can get and then you pull your big ear in, it's no big ear, you have to pull it down here to make it collapse, and that means you're putting 6 inches of brake. That's not good enough. So if that's the case, you've got to let go of those brakes, pop them on the poppers, reach up and get the big ears, or do something else altogether.
Greg Hamilton advises doing both at the same time. But
That's 'cause he comes
like
from
you say,
South
you've got to be
Africa.
confident you're actually grabbing the right ones.
Yeah, but also the origin is from where they started flying. If you start flying in places where you're flying high, then yes, two together is fine.
I must confess I do two together
Yeah.
with my foot on the speed bar ready to go.
Yeah. As I say, it's when you're low to the ground and you pull something that's the wrong one. That's when it's a problem.
Yeah.
And can you know how many big ears is...
Big ears, bigger ears, typically nowadays don't. There's not very many lines on your average modern wing, and lots of them don't like two-line big ears. There's just not enough wing left, and you run the risk of stalling. You could, ask a manufacturer, will it do two-line big ears? But it's a bit sketchy. It's almost better just to do single big ears and full bar, but I'll come to that. Asymmetric ears, a different scenario. If you're comfortable with 50% deflations and with pulling 50% deflations, pulling slowly a 50% deflation just on one side gives you a large collapse. And I frequently use that as a descent technique because it's less painful. Just reach up, take an air riser, pull it down, and now I can, weight shift, make the glide go straight, turn against it if I have to, depending on the wing I'm on. And I'm holding a riser, not a line. It may give you more control, and if nothing else, it's just a change. Sometimes you're trying to get down from great height without doing anything too stressful.
So you're talking about all the A lines on one side?
All the A's on one side, but you want to be comfortable and confident with 50% deflations before you do this. So really, as somebody who's already done this SIV course. Just slowly pull them down, creates a 50% deflation, and off you go. Don't do it quickly, because sometimes you get much more than you expect. Bunny ears, or B3 tip stalls, B3 ears, what you're actually doing is stalling the tip. It doesn't work on many gliders. It might work on your Delta, and it's for the higher aspect ratio wings. Who here is flying an A or a low B wing? Yeah, so Paul basically is the only one that's not on an A or a high B or on a low B. So yeah, you're the one for bunny ears. It may or may not do it. Find out on the ground first of all if it does it. If it does it in the air, if it does it on the ground, cool. Try it one side in the air. See if that works. See if you can fly it straight. Read the manual. It may do it. It may be rigged such that it simply won't do it.
Would it cause a cravat? Is there a potential of cravat doing that?
Not really. Normally it's the exact opposite. It's less inclined to go wrong than the big ear.
Right, okay. Well, I've had a couple of cravats and dealt with them.
Yeah. It might even be a useful way of dealing with a cravat, actually, a small cravat.
Well, I did what Gandhi said and just hold it on the spin point.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Right.
So bunny ears or B3 tip stalls or B3 ears, typically it's for the higher ratio wings, so as you go up the rankings on your gliders, if you go up, there's no need to. Modern wings are pretty good. It's very hard on the fingers, classically, even with big gloves on. There's a lot of load on those tip lines. But once you've got it in, you pull hard on the B3 or the outermost B line, the tip folds back. Because it's folded straight back, rather than a big ear where it comes down and back, it's clean and break on the wing and it generates less drag. Also, it's a faster recovery. When you let go of it, it just goes poof, straight out. I've never known a glider yet that did them that didn't just immediately bring the tips forward as soon as you let go. So if your glider does them, they're really nice to use. Back to big ears, some gliders will oscillate on big ears. And sometimes there's not what you can do about that. Apart from don't big ear them. Chances are, giving it a bit of speed bar is actually going to make it worse. You could try, but you're out into the realms of does this glider fly properly anyway.
Would that stabilise in return if you sort of like leant with it?
Very probably, yes.
And you just kept it and then sort of like went the other way for a little while?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, very probably. What you've got to watch though is that it doesn't wind up into a spiral dive. If you start spiral diving with big ears in, odds on you're going to exceed the wing load, the strength of the lines and blow the lines apart.
what would be the recovery for that? Let the inner one go and...
Reserve.
Yeah, so the parachute, your strings are broken.
No. But before that,
Just let go. Just let go of the big ears. They should recover in their own accord. If it's spiralling, if it's starting to spiral, you've got to let go and you've got to counter the spiral from that.
Delta on its own from big ears, you have to pump them out.
Yeah. So you'd want to be, if you've managed to put it in big ears and set it spiraling, you'd be wanting to pull brake to get it out of the spiral, I think. Possibly just both brakes might be enough. Sometimes when you pull both, it might put the ears in a spiral as opposed to a normal flight. But yeah, you're on the edges of who's tested that.
Sorry?
You're on the edges of who's tested that behaviour. It's not something that they're testing. It's not something that's a certified test, at least. They may well do it. Spiral dives. Who's done a spiral dive? How many metres a second do you get?
Oh, I can't remember.
Lots. No idea?
I've I don't know, 15, 18.
Good one, a proper one. Robin?
You were watching, not me.
Yeah.
Wasn't very many though.
Yeah, I can't remember, that's a long time ago. Yeah, so spiral dives. The old way to initiate spiral, what was a spiral dive for? If it's something you're doing, it's to get down in a rush whilst keeping the glider shaped. So you're flying it through a rapid descent technique, whereas a lot of these beeline stalls and even big ears, you're interfering with the way the glider flies. At least with doing a spiral dive, you're remaining in the normal sort of flying configuration, the wings generating lift all across its span, etc. So you can fly it in and you can fly it back out. So in that regard, it's one of the safer ones. The disadvantage with it is it's quite a high physiological stress. You can pull up to 6G, which is well into G-lock territory, certainly for the older pilots in more upright harnesses. And if you were to hit anything in a spiral dive, anything more substantial than a bee is going to hurt seriously. You will not get away with this spiral diving into water, into trees, anything like that. So don't spiral dive into anything. But how do you
say spiraling into water would be
terrible? Right. Yeah. Don't want to spiral into water. You'll come out black and blue if you come out at all. There's spiral dives and spiral dives, and some people have hit water hard enough to kill themselves.
one thing I know that some people suggested doing a big hill on the outside and spiraling.
We'll get there. That's a different thing.
Alright, okay. Sorry for jumping in.
That's all right. So, spiral dive. Well, the old way, how do we get into a spiral dive, is you induce a mild wing load. So you turn gently to the left, and then you look right and you lean right, and you come out on the outside brake, and you come gently in on the inside brake, and you start winding up the turn, gradually and slowly building it up. Glider comes. It goes from here, it comes down, and you'll feel this sudden phase change when it gets to about here. I mean, wow, that's incredible. We call that on the rail. And if you look at your vario, you'll be doing about 2 or 3 metres a second down. It's not a spiral dive. It's a thermaling technique, if the thermal's strong enough. So yeah, down to here. You then keep pulling brake and then start to, on the inside only, no outside brake. Start to angle the glider down. Now that is spiral diving. But it's taken me quite a long time to get it into that configuration. Mostly when we need to spiral dive, we don't really need to do 4,000 feet. We're flying along cross country and suddenly you think, oh, I've overcooked it on this thermal, I've climbed a little bit too high. 2 or 3 turns of spiral, back out and fly away again. So I want to get it into the spiral quickly, down, back out in a reasonable time, and then get back on my way. So we've come up with a different way of entering the spiral.
And the correct recovery is?
We've got to get in first. So, slow the glider down to about minimum 6 speed, so hands level with the carabiners. You then look into your turn, lean into your turn, come up on the outside hand and down on the inside hand. Start off slowly, as in up fast, down a little bit, and that just goes around it. So next time, start off up, down a little bit more, and you'll get, feel your way to getting to the point where it goes and drops in very, very quickly. Don't go first time, right, I'm going all the way up and all the way down, because you're just going to spin the thing. And you might even spin it on this horizontal axis. A McFlurry, that's not what we called it. So yes, you start off, I'll get into cloud base, oh goodness, I just need to lose 100 feet, 100 metres. Down to min sync, look into my turn, there's nobody beneath me, nobody near. Up on the outside, down on the inside, and if I get it just so, in a quarter of a turn, I've entered the spiral dive. I'm doing a near face down spiral. It's very similar to the way that they enter a satted spiral, where they carry on, they're pushing on the risers to make sure they don't get twisted up, and they go just a little bit over the centre. So ideally with a spiral, try not to overcook. You don't want to be going over the centre. Just over the centre is alright. Satted spiral, you go down really fast, your glider's wingtips will typically collapse, and it will just hammer it down, and then we exit it as you would normally exit a spiral. But don't go into deep sat territory, that's acro, that's no functional purpose in normal flight. So, the question was, how do we recover? Actually, let's go back into a bit more into how we get in, because I said yes, dive it in and round you go. If I were to just do that, what's most likely to happen to me?
Collapse.
Yeah, all the blood's going to fall out of my head, down into my feet, and I'm going to pass out. So, we've got to address that as best we can. For a start, you want to be as supine as possible in your harness. Sit right back and try and have your feet up if you're in a canoe harness or stirrup harness that will support it. So that as you're in the spiral, we're in the spiral, and I'm in this sort of position. Feet down, head up. I will put, when I look into the turn, I'll put my head hard onto the inside shoulder, so that I'm trying to constrict the blood flow a little bit out of the brain. It's not going to do a lot of good, but it does a bit. Tense up all your abdominal muscles. Try and tense up all your muscles. Try and keep that blood where it belongs. And don't forget to breathe. So, breathing gasps, make sure you do breathe. If you start to get any of the symptoms of G-lock while you're spiral diving, G-induced loss of consciousness, you've got to get it out of the spiral sharpish. So what might they be? Anyone remember?
Something to do with your vision, maybe?
A lot to do with the vision.
Yeah, grey vision.
Yeah, you can lose colour. Any advance on that?
Yeah, peripheral vision diminishes.
Yeah, tunnel vision can occur. You can get complete visual shutdown. And all manner of other visual disturbances, but tunnel vision, red or grey are the classics.
Red's negative G though, isn't it, typically? Isn't it?
I don't know.
When it goes from
Maybe, yeah.
From the aerobatics training that I've done,
Yeah.
it's negative G was like red, get rid out because it's all located.
Yeah, makes sense.
And we don't do negative G, do we?
Hopefully not.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
If your head's back here,
only very briefly.
Yeah. Your feet go into the spiral dive and your head's back there.
Yeah.
It could be
I suppose, yeah.
So you're saying push your feet out. When we did our SIV last year, we were taught to bring the legs under because
Bring your legs under
keeps the blood pressure up.
Depends on your harness.
Right.
If you've got a sit-up and bake harness, just tucking it, balling up is good.
Yeah.
If you've got an unstable situation, so you're thinking, oh, it's very rough and light to get collapsed, then balling up is good. For spiral diving, I find keeping my feet out works better. But like I say, I'm upright like this, rather than bunched up like this, because like this, I'll let my feet go back, and with the force, I'm not going to keep my knees up, they're going to go back.
I suppose keeping your legs out in front of you is good way to tense.
Yeah. Although it does require your harness to be set up correctly so that you can, otherwise your feet will just bend out. So, recovering a spiral dive. So, if you've done a fairly gentle spiral dive, sort of a certification level one where the glider's not facing the ground and hammering at it, It's just gently going round and round. Usually, with most gliders, you just ease the initiating brake up and it will come out of its own accord.
Quick question before we carry on. How deep is the hand going down when you're doing the actual spiral dive? How far are you actually reaching? Are you going way beyond the carabiner?
No. Around about carabiner level.
Alright, okay, so...
Typically, if I've got a wrap on, my hand is at the top of the
without
carabiner.
that wrap, you'd probably be like another hand span below it.
Yeah.
Right.
And what I will often do, if I'm guiding, so I'll get it spiralling, get it properly facing down, and then put my hands up. With no brake on. The spiral dive is a stable configuration. So once you get it properly spiralling, you put your hands up and it just goes faster. It goes down even faster. We had a guy, a local pilot in India, we had to get involved with the recovery of, who wasn't familiar with that shift in behaviour. So from a fairly gentle spiral, you put your hands up and it would all come out of its own accord. Then you certified gliding. Once you've got it properly spiral diving beyond the limits of the certified spiral, putting your hands up is not going to make it recover at all. It's just going to make it throw itself at the ground even quicker. But it seems to do it without an increase in G. So you're not going round and round any faster, you're just going down faster, which is worth knowing. So we know we've got the thing spiraling madly. How are you going to stop it spiraling madly? What's the obvious thing to do?
That's all it.
It's a little excessive.
Outside brake?
Sort of. Remember, putting both your hands up, got it going really, really quickly. So what might slow it down?
Go on the outside, right?
Both brakes.
Yeah, but
Initially, when it's really motoring down, just pull both brakes. Slow it down, then weight shift out, then apply a bias on the brakes. If you, from full speed, just pull the outside brake, you might end up with the thing going careering out very aggressively. With the spiral dive that you've done to lose height, you don't really want to recoup that height in the climb out. So the old French, the old style exit where you get the glider up onto the rail and then just let it climb itself out like an exocet missile, is not really what you want. If you've done that, wait for glider to come ahead, brake and release the piff paff if anyone's done the SIV, or that sort of fine. But that's a very untidy exit for an intentional spiral. It's what you would do if you want your height back, if you've had a spiral because of a collapse. But if you're trying to lose height, you don't go back up again. So what we do then, we slow it down, weight shift out of the turn. Don't forget the weight shift out. It's surprising again how many people do. Weight shift out, slow down, and then steer it so it comes up to here. And now, at that point, that's where you burn off the surplus energy. So, woof, 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 woof. Once it starts to slow down, you're leaving it in a slightly steered out position. You'll feel it start to climb out. Put it back in. Each time it climbs out, push it back in a little bit. So a bit of a 6-minute bit as you go around. So you're just letting it come up slowly and gracefully, rather than what it will naturally do, which is to rip up with a surplus of energy and climb. You're now just trying to bring it out gently, 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 until eventually you realise that you've got no brake on, so it's just flying away. If you can get that perfectly balanced, you'll go into your spiral dive in a quarter of a turn, down to where you want to be, burn off the excess energy, back to level flight, without the vario changing once you decide when it's time to stop. That's something, if you're getting high at home, that's something to work on. Just one turn, down and release and fly away. Enter gently, exit gently, work on it, work it up. If you do accidentally allow the rapid exit, the important thing is you'll feel, oh, it's ripped up, and it's now right behind me, so you've got to go hands up. If you pull the brakes for the glider behind you, what's it going to do? So hands all the way up, wait for it to get to the top. In the good old days, they would just come forwards and fly away. Today's gliders seem to get to the top and then rotate about a point halfway between you and the wing. Where in the old days they seem to come up and fly off nicely, now they come up and go shooting forwards. and they will come right forwards and you can land in it. A guy died last October doing exactly that, Indian Army pilot. So be very wary of the shoot forwards when you get to the top of the climb. Gets to the top, when it gets to about 15 degrees, 20 degrees ahead of you, stop it and release. So we put as much brake as you want to stop forwards travel, and then immediately release it. Normally it only takes about 8 inches of brake to do it.
I saw Rafa Daz cock up a spiral exit, and he actually looped the fucking thing, and he went right over the top. And I asked him if he was scared. He went, "Yeah." Frightened into it.
Yeah.
Never seen it done before though.
That's how they first started out trying to do spirals, was to do an aggressive exit. And nobody could quite get it right until they realised that the way to do it was to turn the spiral on its side and offset it. And then it became quite easy. Having got the glider out of the spiral dive, if you were spiralling good and proper, you're going to be totally confused. Your senses are going to be confused. You're not going to feel whether the glider's flying or anything. So you've just got to trust that the glider is flying. It's going straight and level. The Vario is not doing 27 down. It must be flying. And fairly quickly your senses should come back.
How long does it usually take? Like 3 or 4 seconds and you're back to...
Depends how old you are.
Sorry?
Depends how old you are. It's getting longer and longer.
You're making me feel old.
Yes.
But it's not going to be minutes, so it's what?
No, it should. Well, it's not impossible, but no, it's unlikely to be. Swiss spiral. Swiss spiral is what you mentioned a moment ago, where you pull a big ear and then spiral dive in the opposite direction. It's a slightly strange sensation. It feels like the glider's. It almost feels like a sat. It feels like the glider's centre of rotation is between you and the wing. It's definitely less stressful on the pilot, but it may be more stressful on the wing, the bit of the wing that's left. I haven't measured the loads with a low strain gauge or whatever. I think that the jury is out on that. And again, it's probably one of those glider-dependent things. But certainly...
How much G would... I mean, if a normal spiral gets you up to 6 G, how much G would like a Swiss spiral get you up to? About 4?
Yeah, something like that. Or not even that, really.
Well, in that case, if you've got like a big ear, I mean, you've still got like 3/4 of your wing left, 2/3 at least, so the ratio would work out, it'd be about the same stress.
Maybe. I would want to put strain gauges on each line and find out.
Yeah,
so definitely.
Just thinking about the maths for a moment.
Yeah.
It's going to be about...
But the glider's not rotating, you're rotating about a different radius and all sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah, but that sort of doesn't matter because like, it's weight versus lift.
Yeah.
It's not a physics class, Paul.
There might be more stress on certain sections of the wing.
Yeah.
The functional tip might not be doing a lot. Like I say, I think the jury's out. It seems good, but until it's more sort of generally accepted,
You might load at the centre a bit more.
You might be loading your glider more.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a mind. It does work. Some people really like it. Some people find it a bit strange. Wing overs as a descent technique.
How do you exit a Swiss spiral?
Same as you would exit a normal spiral. Break it out, bring it back to the horizontal, and then fly it up and out.
So to break it out, you've got to let go of your big ear. If you pull in the big ear and you're...
Yeah. But you can pretty much let go. It's not going to come out until you pull the brake. Wing overs as a descent technique, not really very good. They're almost better as a climbing technique. Some pilots really like them as a descent technique. It's not something I particularly push. The reason is it's an oscillatory move, and it's the manoeuvre that puts more people in the lake than anything else. If you overdo it, you can end up above the wing with no energy and get wet. If there's a lake and a lifeboat. So yeah, if you're going to use the wing over as a descent technique, it does increase your descent rate. use a wibble under. Very subtle, gentle wing overs, not right up here over the top of the wing ones. If you're doing wing overs and they're starting to get too big, just turn it into a turn and get rid of the energy that way. Don't try and make the wing over get less, you'll never manage that. It's all about timing. Not particularly going to go into it. Down to Gall did a very good first person point of view video of him doing wing overs. It was, I look, I lean, I brake, I release. I look, I lean, I brake, I release. And so on.
I wish I'd video that.
Oh yes. Well, you've got Down to Gall doing it.
Yeah, there's a dance tune in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But you said that was wing overs can be used as a climbing technique.
Yeah, sometimes.
That blows my mind.
It's wibble unders more than wing overs. If you're up against the ridge in a coal, and you've got thermal coming up that coal, you don't want a 360, then you just link your turns and do little wing overs, go up until you're high enough to then go round and round.
So not S-turns but wing overs?
Well, it's a linked S-turn, isn't it? It's somewhere in the middle.
Right, okay. Right, that's a new one on me.
Right. So that's kind of the descent techniques that you are going to use. So what about instability? Things that can happen to you. What could possibly go wrong? What's the most common thing you think happens to your paraglider? It doesn't really
collapse.
So what's more important, fixing it or preventing it? Yeah. So how are you going to prevent getting asymmetric deflations? First one.
Fly actively.
Better than that.
Damp the wing a little bit.
Think sooner in your flight. What's the first thing you do before you in your
ground handling?
In your Geordie's cat?
Check the weather.
Check the weather, and if it's a bouncy day, maybe I won't fly now. I'll just leave it. Leave it till it's calmer.
That was a trick question.
It was a trick question, yes.
Dirty bastard.
But it's not a trick question, you know. What's the best way of making sure your glider stays open? Fly when it's calm.
Leave it in the bag.
Yeah.
That's a trick question.
Yeah. So, first of all, pick your weather. If the weather's too rough for you, look at other people flying. If they're being tossed around the sky, don't fly. Yes, you will find that often all the more experienced pilots come and land, and all the less experienced pilots are the ones that are still flying when it's bouncing around. There's a couple of reasons why that might be. One is that the more experienced pilots are flying higher aspect ratio, higher performing wings, which have got harder suspension, and the air is telling them with a louder voice that it's time to go and land. Whereas your E&A is just sitting there going bubble, 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 and you think, this is lovely. And to a certain extent, that is the case. You know, if the E&A wing is happy flying, it's happy flying. But do look at everybody else flying, and if it's slowly but surely all the more experienced pilots are going down, and you're the only people up there in red ribbons, think there might be a reason for that. Don't fly when it's too hectic. Active flying, yes. So you're flying along, and oh goodness me, it's getting rough. We had a little bit of a chat recently, there has been a bit of chat recently about just pulling a little bit of brake, just enough to stay in touch with the wing. What on a modern aerofoil that is likely to do is make it more inclined to shoot forwards and have exactly the opposite effect of what you want. So really, if you don't pull anything, or you pull quite a bit, down to kind of mid-sync or thereabouts, just in touch with the glider isn't helping matters. It's moving the centre of pressure backwards and making the aerofoil less pitch stable. So, oh my goodness, it's getting rough, down to mid-sync. From the mid-sync position, you can then control any surges and dives, and you've got room to let them up as well as pull them back down again.
So you're saying, Steve, that your advice is don't feel any tension in the lines?
Either, if you're worried about turbulence, you've either got no brake on, and in which case I would then be on the back risers, flying glider on the back risers. Even on the E&A, It's very effective. So I'm not pulling down the brakes, I'm changing the angle of attack more direct. Or I'm slowing it down to minimum 6-speed. And I would say for most newer pilots, it's slow to mid 6-speed. If it's that snotty, slow it down. You're much safer with that fair bit of brake on.
Could you say on that, could you say what your views on taking a wrap? Because I keep on getting different advice. Yeah. Some people say, just take a wrap as a matter of course. Someone said to me, no, because that actually violates the certification of the wing.
It depends whether you let the wrap off when you put your hands up. You can put your hands up with a wrap, so you put your hand in, you've taken it around and you're holding it. You can get your brake to the 0 position by just rolling your palm a little bit. So you've now let the brake up all the way, and don't forget, depending on how big a standoff your pulley has on the riser, you might need to go further up. So with a wrap you can let the brakes all the way off, but yes, you have to be aware of it. There's other good reasons not to and to take wraps. So why shouldn't we take wraps? It means that you're pulling more brakes, so you may accidentally stall the glider, or you're more likely to accidentally stall the glider. The discharge side of that is that you get a more positive flare. It means that you're changing your hand position, so instead of working up here, off in the mule, you're working here in the pull domain rather than heading towards the push domain. And your musculature is much better in this manner. You can move faster with more power. Big disadvantage is you putting quite a lot of compression around your hand and cutting off the blood supply in your fingers, and it doesn't matter how much you release it and go back on, you will not get good blood supply in your fingers. Ultimately you're going to cause harm to your fingers. You can get neurological damage and circulatory damage, so compartment tremors and the like. So although nearly all the old school pilots fly with a wrap, or a variation of a theme, it's not a very good idea. So try not to as much as possible. Funnily enough, the sort of the new Enzos.
I've never found the need to pull a wrap. I always put my fingers where the string touches the brake. Put my fingers on there. I can feel what mine's doing. Yeah. I've got enough range.
Yeah. I mean that's a good one. If you put your hand on it, but never ever put your hand all the way through. And I know some people will teach to do that, especially in SIV. It's one of the most dangerous things you can do. If you put your hand all the way through the brake handle and then turn around and grab it, which is a lovely way to fly, it means that you won't throw a parachute, especially if you've got great big bulky winter gloves on.
Or you reach for it and all you do is apply brake.
Yeah, and then it pulls your hand away again. We first realised this particularly with Dave Snowden when he crashed in Castellon de Sos. He'd flown, Castellon might have been Purdie, he'd flown, bombed into the halfway down Bombay Food. It was a day when we were allowed to relaunch. So he got back up to the top of the mountain, ditched all his ballast and taken off, and of course now it's an hour stronger than it was in the first flight. Big collapse, all gone horribly wrong, gone to throw the parachute with his hand all the way through, and it kept pulling his hand away from the parachute, never got the parachute out, hit the ground, broke his shoulder, but lived to tell the tale. Subsequently, we've found 3 dead pilots with their hands through the brakes and no parachutes deployed. There's no telling whether they just didn't bother deploying the parachute, but we think it's more than likely that the reason they didn't is exactly this scenario. So don't put your hands all the way through. Nice surface. The only time it is cool to put your hands all the way through is when you haven't got a parachute. You're not losing out.
So how far should you put your hands through? Just like
keep your thumb out.
Keep your thumb out. Okay, so like that's okay. So your thumb's still outside the brake.
Yeah.
No, I'm twisting and I'm pinching my fingers that way as well.
Well, if you're taking a wrap, try and get it around the body of the hand rather than around your fingers. If it goes around your fingers, it's really very bad. But yeah, if you can try as much as possible not to fly with a wrap, it is better. One of our instructors, one of our TIs actually, lost the sensation of frostbitten on that big Margate flight last summer, and it was about 3 months before his fingertips came back. It's not very, it is very painful, it's not very pleasant. So, where are we going? Asymmetric deflations. First of all, if it's getting rough, slow down, try and prevent it in the first place. But we're flying along and we get what's called a Jackie Chan. Normally, you experience the rough air coming and you go, oh, I'll slow down, and that way you don't get the deflation. But the one that gets you is the Jackie Chan. It's jumped out from the cupboard, you're thinking, this is lovely smooth air, I'm just leaving this thermal, and voila, jumps out from the wall and chops your glider away, and you have no warning of it. So now we've got a deflation. If, as is often the case, your hands are already up, so you get 50% deflation, hands are already up, no big deal. A little bit of brake to go straight and it should be fine. If, when that happens, you've got quite a modicum of brake on, what's going to happen if I go, I've got a 50% deflation? I remember they said go hands up, so I now just put both hands up.
It's going to auto-rotate, potentially.
It's going to auto-rotate like a good one. It's going to surge forwards and dive into a spiral. So if you have got brake on when you get to collapse, release it gracefully. You don't want to stall the wing, be aware of that, the flying path, but don't just go straight hands up as quick as you can. I've got to collapse, but I want to keep the glider flying, so I've got to give it its head. 10 centimetres of brake, something like that, should be enough to keep it going straight if there's about half the glider missing.
Wouldn't you like to describe that feeling of letting the hand up as though the wing is actually lifting your hand up rather than just punching it?
Yeah. It's a good.
I mean, that's how the few times I've had that. That's how I've done it.
Yeah, it's a good way of describing it. Basically, you're being aware of how much it's pitching as you bring your hands up. Just don't. You can let it pitch to there, but you don't want to make it pitch to here. You certainly don't want to make it pitch back at all, because if you do that, it's a mare to recover. If you stall the glider with half of it gone, it can take a very long time to get the thing flying again. I remember doing it as a demonstration in Monaco on a comp wing, and it took me about 3,000 feet to get the glider flying again, just enough time to land on the beach. Another thing is don't overmanage the wing. So do slow it down, but equally don't react to every little tiny move slowly and gracefully. If you overmanage it, you're just going to make it less efficient. You're not going to go places. And that's a difficult one to call. It's really its own experience that's going to get that ingrained. So we'll say we're flying at full speed and we've got 50% deflation. 50% deflation, you'll read lots of things. As people say, weight shift against the turn. If you've got 50% deflation, you can't weight shift against the turn because half the risers are just not doing anything but dangling like this. If it's a 20% deflation, by all means weight shift against it and particularly brake. Just a glorified big air, or 30% deflation. Once it gets to about half, there's nothing you're going to do in terms of weight shifting but dangling. A little bit of brake, as little as you can get away with to make it fly on a safer line. And most modern wings, they'll just slowly come out of their own accord. You may choose to pump it. If you do, it's down 1,000 up on the collapse side. Down 1,000 up, as far as you can reach. We're trying to get to curl that wing back into the airflow. The classic, this is useless, this does nothing. 1991, Ian Curra said that, and nothing has changed. On a hotter wing, you may find that 50% deflation can't make it fly straight. High performance wing, but as long as you can maintain a reasonably safe course on a very, very lazy 360, all well and good. If it's cravatted and it's doing a lazy 360, that's troublesome, but we'll come to that in a minute. With a hot wing, as you get the deflation, you may not be able to keep the glider going straight. It may well turn back 90 degrees. But you should, with 50%, you should be able to just about get it to come back. Recovery of the deflation, however, may well require party input. So it might not snivel out of its own accord. might want to pump it, as mentioned. Done that. Bigger deflations, over 60%. What's going to happen if I get a 75% deflation and I try and make the glider fly straight on any glider, pretty much?
Stall it.
It's going to stall. So initially you've got to let it dive. If you get a big deflation, you've got to go hands up, allow it to come forwards, and as it comes forwards, as it approaches the horizon, you then brake it back. Try to weight shift if you can, but like I said before, weight shift's not really going to be doing a lot. But you brake as it gets to the horizon. You should then swoop through. It's almost like a wing over manoeuvre. You swoop through, and as you come through the bottom, usually you've got more than half the wing back, and then you just deal with that 60%, 30% deflation or whatever's left. But yeah, with a big deflation, you've got to let it dive, brake it just before the horizon, swoop through, and keep flying. Symmetrical deflations. Who's had a symmetrical deflation and the whole lot's gone boom? Anybody else? Describe.
Well, to be honest, it was over before I knew, and there's only people who were watching it, but it was a caver.
Yeah.
I was sort of just out front of the hill,
Yeah.
and just out front went. The first I really knew, I mean, it went a bit odd, but I just let it snap out, and
Yeah.
I didn't lose anything really. So.
Unusual?
It was in India, it was coming out of a thermal,
Yeah.
and just went whack, and just braked it.
Yeah, often the first thing you know about it is the big bang as it recovers. So you're flying along, you get a whole lot of those, and you sort of free fall. Whoa, that seems weird. The glider pitches behind you, and as it gets back far enough, it's exposing the undersurface of the air. It reinflates aggressively, explosively, and it comes back and flying. If that happens, just counter any excessive surge if necessary. Once you get to ENC, behaviour is allowed to be different. ENCs and above are allowed to stay collapsed. So you're flying and you get a full frontal collapse and it stays collapsed. You pitch forwards and then you fall back under it and then you go wobbling down to the ground. And it may often start spinning as well. It usually will. And it's a good reason not to go to ENC. Any class of glider can do it. But it's within the certification of an ENC, whereas ENBs, etc., we hope that they won't do it. But if you pull a little bit of brake too much as it's coming out of the frontal and you stop the glider from going flying again, you hold it into a deep stall, then yes, it's going to drop into this configuration, and there we go.
Can the leading edge, can it collapse so bad that the leading edge touches the trailing edge or beyond?
Basically,
and then actually get stuck in that.
Basically, that's what's happening with the ENCs. The leading edge is going under, and then it's being held in place. It's folded completely under, held in place, and doesn't want to recover.
So the only way out of that is to bury the brake into the...
So the way out of that is, ideally, take a wrap if you haven't already got one, and down and up, and down and up. Give it 2 or 3. If that works, great. If that doesn't work, throw your parachute. Throw your parachute before you've lost all forward speed. The reason for that is, if you have lost all forward speed and you throw your parachute, it's very hard to get the parachute to open away from you. When you throw it, even if you do your best and throw it up and away, so it's doing a ballistic curve as you go down, you want to open up there, but often they don't. They then continue to fall, but they're in a nice and neat package, so they fall either at the same rate as you, or a little bit faster than you, get to beneath you, then they open, and then you go straight into them. That's the worst case scenario. I've seen it happen. A guy was mid-air by a hang glider at Annecy, called Football. Got away with it, broken shoulder, landed on a cliff. So, yeah, if you've got an ENC glider and it's collapsed, or any glider and it's collapsed and it's not come out, quick wrap, down, up. Has it covered? Down, up. Has it recovered? Down, up. No, it hasn't. Throw the parachute.
Why just 3 times? Why not a 4th?
Because you're slowing down. You're slowing down. You're slowing down.
Oh, okay, yeah, of course,
you may even not have time for 3 really.
What do you reckon to Russ Ogden's suggestion about sort of like bringing your hands down to your tips and just close your eyes for 5 seconds and wait 5 seconds and then open your eyes and carry on?
From front or from just anything?
Well, from anything. If it's just all going tits up.
Yeah, if you've lost complete plot, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But what you may find is you end up deep stall from that position. And then you go, oh, I'm deep stalled. Okay, I'll put my hands up.
But from a deep stall, speed bar.
Yeah. Or with the glider just in trim and everything's hunky dory, just put your hands up. Right. And it should start flying. Yeah. I mean, that is an abrogation of control, but sometimes, if all else fails, try it.
Well, he was talking about cascades, and if you haven't, if you've gone one thing, another thing, a third thing.
Yeah, if you're cascading a conway or anything, stop doing stuff. What we normally recommend is stall it and then recover the stall, because that's a big red reboot bump. I'll get to that. Most important one with symmetrical deflations, having got the glider open, get your hands up. Don't hold that tip level brake, because you'll stop it flying. It will deep stall, and you saw the video of Chris's incident. What he needed to do was get every last inch of brake off, and it may well have flown. Sometimes you get a full frontal. A lot of gliders are designed to do this. The middle will open, but the tips will stay collapsed, and they will slowly open. We call it snivelling open. If it's in that situation, just keep your hands up and watch it recover. Don't try and pump it to speed things along, because it's teetering on the edge of not flying. You just let it open slowly, it'll do it nicely. The reason from doing that is it slows the dive, so there's less of an aggressive recovery. So it opens up here instead of diving right down there and opening and falling into it or anything silly. Sometimes when you get a collapse, you get the collapse on one side, it shoots off that way, recovers and side slips as it recovers. And you'll often find that it's the opposite side from the initial problem. The glider slides sideways into its, the wing goes into its own lines, so we form a cravat. It's more common with the hotter wings, to be honest, but it can happen with the beginner wing as well. Having got a cravat, depending on how big it is, there's a sequence of different techniques you can use. First of all, if you can make the glider fly straight, you might just be able to pump it out sometimes. But if that doesn't work, you've always got to stabilise the line. The little thin one that goes to the tips that fans out this way. Usually it's off the B riser, and usually it's a different colour. So, and it will be, if you've got a cravat, it will typically be hanging loose. Just grab hold of it, pull it down, pass it to this hand. I'm probably pulling brake on this side to keep myself going straight. Slide up it again, pull it down, bring that tip down until you've pulled out your cravat. Then you can let go. That's one way. That works well for the smaller cravats.
That's worried about getting the line tucked in the buckle and sort of like when it does pop, it's just like...
it's just there, that's right. Get off there. You can try and fly, put it down, it makes very little difference, very slight turn. But yeah, putting on the stable line works nicely for less aggressive cravats. It does need time in your hands, so if it's close to the ground and you can barely control the glider, then there are other things you can do that might be more effective. You can just reach up, take the big ear line and put a big ear. If the big ear will encompass the cravat, you can now just fly along all day with one big ear if you feel the need. But usually pop it in, great, I can fly now, release it, oh it's still in there, pop it in again, release it, maybe 2 or 3 goes it comes out, maybe not. But at least you know you can pull the big ear and now carry on flying, go and make a safe landing, even if you can't get the cravat out.
I've got to ask, if it's unflyable with a cravat but it's flyable with a big ear, what's the actual difference?
The difference is that the cravat is basically forming, it's like towing a bucket. I flew a glider once down Furley, I think it was, and I saw there was a tiny cravat on the wingtip. I didn't think anything of it. Ignore that, because it's minuscule, it won't do anything, just a little deformation. And it was almost impossible to fly because it was right out on the tip, and it just wanted to turn me into the cravat. Because it's got such a long lever arm. Bigger cravats, the lever arm is huge. What you often find with a big cravat is you can just about stop it from immediately spiral diving. You can hold it back to a turn, a lazy turn, but even so it will still get deeper. And eventually, regardless of how much brake you're putting, it just drops into a spiral. So if you've got a cravat and it's doing that, and you can't can't control it in any other way, throw your parachute. But if you can big ear it, incorporate it, and then you can fly the big ear glider. It might be that you just put a whole 50% deflation, fly what's left. We know we can fly a 50% deflated glider quite comfortably, and that's a huge cravat potentially that you can depower.
What do you think is the suggestion of pulling a big ear on the other side? Would that make no difference?
The other thing you can do is, if you've got particularly what works particularly well if you've got a higher aspect ratio wing, but it does work on a lower aspect ratio wing, so you're lucky, is what they call the end-line manoeuvre. After an Aussie pilot who first observed it, you get a cravat. So I've got a cravat on this side, just take 2 wraps and right down, spin that side and release it. So as soon as it comes back, you release it. And it might take a couple of goes. But classically, what's happened with the cravat is it's the forward airspeed that's holding it against the line, or into the lines. So it's flat, pressed against the airflow, perpendicular to the airflow, pressed against the lines. Once you can take the airflow away, it will creep out a bit. And creep out a bit if you have to do it 2 or 3 times. It does require a bit of space because you're concentrating on that and not on missing trees and things. But it's a very, very good solution. So 2 wraps, stall it, work, release, stall it, work, release, stall it, release. So just spinning it momentarily. As I say, the higher aspect ratio gliders, it does tend to work better. The lower aspect ratio ones, if you're a bit too slow on the release, they can actually enter a spin. What else could you do? You can take it to the point of stall, but not stall, but it's not my favourite way. I'd rather keep the other side working fairly well and deal with it with this end-line manoeuvre. Worst case scenario, you may have to stall it. If it's a real biggie, tuck your feet underneath you and stall the glider. We'll talk about how to do a stall, or just throw your parachute.
What about collapsing the whole wing? Would that just make it worse?
If you just pull the whole lot.
Just pull the whole lot.
And
then when it bangs out,
it might, but it might recover it, but more likely it might make it drop straight into a face-down spiral. I would suggest. So yeah, you're rolling the dice, I think, doing that.
Tea break?
Yeah, beer break.
We'll try and get finished before asking more questions.
Yeah, that's a very good idea.
You can give me a list.
Yeah, it's fine. Right, deep stalls. So I briefly talked about full stall. With full stall, tuck your legs in. Always tuck your legs in if you're going to do a full stall. What's the plot? No, we haven't talked about full stall at all. We talked about cravats. Right, so deep stalls. Deep stalls do happen to you. Most often you'll see a deep stall when you pull down a beeline stall and release it too slowly, or you have a symmetrical deflation or something like that and you overbrake it. But sometimes it can happen if you've got a glider that's out of trim and just easing the brakes down, it's a bit bouncy, slowing it down, slowing it down, slowing it down, and the next thing you know is, ground's coming closer, with wind's going that way instead of at me, noise changes. So if your glider has deep stall, you will observe absence of airspeed. The air is no longer in your face, it's coming at you. You can usually hear people on the ground saying, oh look, he's got too much brake on, he needs to put his hands up. If you look up at your glider, it looks slightly foreshortened. And
it's basically become a parachute rather than a wing.
Become a parachute. Because it's going just straight down, there's no air going into the cells, so they're not inflated, so they go in where they would normally come down at you, between the ribs. If you look up at it, it's like a hungry horse. You can see all the ribs poking out. If you've done it by dint of pulling a V-line and letting it go too slowly, pull the V-line down again and let it up much quicker. Sometimes that's enough to destabilise it and get it flying. We used to say, pump the brakes and release. Don't do that with most modern wings. Some of the hotter gliders seem to get away with it, but most of the normals or the A's and B's, if you do that, odds on it will just start spinning like a crazy thing. So you're better off to, if your foot's on the speed bar, push it. That may work. But otherwise, hands behind the A risers, all of them, and push forwards and down, push them away from you. And it's surprising sometimes how much you need to get that airflow to reconnect. Basically, it's becoming more common as performance increases and angle of attack reduces. So yeah, the key thing is to recognise it quickly and get it sorted. Sometimes sync and deep stall can feel quite similar. But usually you can tell because your hands are down here and there's this weird airflow. Look at the glider. Full stall. Now, full stall is not something that happens to you, really. It's something that you do. But it might be that you full stalled the glider because you've pulled too much brake. We do see people doing it on a fairly regular basis. They'll either full stall half the glider, in which case they'll spin it, or they have a collapse, overreact and stall what's left there. If you've got a collapse and you then stall it, it can be very difficult to get it going again in the amount of height we have left to play with. So I really recommend you don't do that. But let's say you've got a cravat or something and you want to get rid of that. How are we going to deal with a full stall? What are we going to do with a full stall? First of all, tuck your feet in underneath you. Don't do it with your feet stuck out the front, especially if you're in a pod or you've got a stirrup. Trying to reduce the polar moment of inertia so that if the glider does shoot off, you go with it. One wrap usually is adequate, and then just put it down and hold it down. Isometric, really tense up all your muscles because the glider's going to slow down and then suddenly you get a little bit of a nod usually, and then woof, it shoots back. And as it goes back, you're going to fall underneath it, and the glider is going to start thrashing around. It's going to try and pull your hands up. You've got to really be tense up. It used to be said, hold on to the base of the harness, but don't do that because you might accidentally grab a parachute or something. Just be ready, be tense. If it was a cravat, usually that whole thrashing around has dealt with the cravat, so now you're into getting the thing flying again. So we're now bringing our hands up smooth as you possibly can, and this is where you've got to be isometric. As the glider's doing this, it's trying to take your hands out, take the brakes out of your hands. Bring them up until you get to approximately the mid-sink position, sometimes a little bit higher than that. And the glider should suddenly steady above you, and the tips will come forwards. And that's what we call the back fly position. So the glider at that juncture is now flying backwards, and it stops thrashing around like a mad thing. Tips come forwards, the glider's going backwards. And you can fly around the lake like that if you're doing a SIV course. From that position, you just want to bring your hands up at about that sort of speed. It's about a second and a half, 2 seconds. If you come up too slowly, you're likely to get one side to fly first, and the glider will helicopter. If you do helicopter it, put it back into back fly, and then try again. But about that sort of speed, it should stop going backwards, come forwards, If you get it just so, it just barely nods forwards and flies away. But that usually takes years and years of practice. For most people, it shoots forwards. You catch it at anywhere in sort of 20 to 45 degree bracket. Don't allow it to come forward so far that it collapses in cravats and causes another whole bit of trouble. So ease them up, and the glider comes forwards. If it's coming forwards too fast, stop and release. So just piff paff again, that release, stop its forward progress, but then hands up again so that it will keep flying. And then it should fly away. You should gradually swing underneath. Nice and easy, he says. It is actually. Line twists. Briefly touched upon those earlier. These will tend to occur when you've got your chest strap too tight, your waist strap too tight, and you encounter a rapid change of direction, rotation, or too loose. So if they're too tight, you've simply got, you're decoupled from the glider. If your waist strap is too loose, as you roll over with the collapse or whatever, that brings your risers closer together as if you've done them up too tight. And so again, you reduce the coupling between you and the wing. So use the sort of manufacturer's harness settings. If you're having a big event, keeping your feet out front is going to make it much more likely that you're going to get this decoupling. You keep going on when the glider's shooting off the other way. So tuck your feet in. Got big collapse, tuck your feet in, try and follow the wing. If you have line twists, first of all, if it's line twisted and spiralling, see if you can deal with the spiral first. Because if you spiral into something, you're spiraling, you're going to lose a lot of height very quickly. And it might be that the only option available to you is to throw the parachute. But it might be that you've got enough motion on the brakes to try and correct the turn. Get it out of the spiral, and then, having got it out of the spiral, kick out the turns. Excuse me. It may be that you can stall the glider. So you're spiralling, you're twisted up forward, but you've got 10,000 feet to play with. You could, I can't get it out of the spiral, but I can stall it. So stall it, you're now stalled, you then wait for the spiral, for the twists to unravel, and then re-engage normal flight from the stall. All of those are pretty sketchy. Often when you're twisted and spiraling together, it's when you're going to throw the parachute. But if you've got a lot of height to play with, you do have a moderate chance of recovering it. Once you've got the glider back in normal flight with twists, what you've got to be careful of is pulling a lot of brake such that you pull the brake, because the lines are all twisted up together like a rope, you can't release the brake. And this is what can happen when you're trying to get it out of the spiral. We pull the brakes, and then it stops spiraling out and it just starts spiraling the other way. So in that situation, you've got no option but to throw the reserve. But if you can get the glider vaguely flying, you can usually pedal your feet, or you can reach above the twist and just force it round. And one or two twists you can normally get out if you've got height to play with. Much more than that, then it can be a bit difficult. They do talk about laying on your side and cycling, pedalling with your feet can help. We'll see. So yeah, twists, best thing again with twists is a bit like getting collapses, is avoid getting them in the first place. When you're getting into rough air, tuck those feet in underneath you. One thing that a lot of newer pilots do seem to struggle with is the difference between a spiral and a spin. How can you tell the difference between a spiral and a spin, anybody?
The one we will be going backwards.
Not necessarily, no.
The spin's on your own axis, isn't it?
Yeah. So with a spin, you're still under the glider. Classically, you're here, the glider's above you, doing that. That's spinning. Spiralling, you're out here, going round and round and round. You might be, the centre of rotation might be out here, or it might be in here, depending. But it's still, that's fundamentally spiralling. Whereas spinning is fundamentally up here. We talk about flat spins and max amp spins. What we're talking about there is the pitch amplitude. So a perfectly flat spin or a helicopter, you've slowed the glider down and they've gone down even further on one side and released on the other, and you're making the glider spin perfectly about that axis. Sometimes it's actually, if you have accidentally got the glider perfectly established in a flat spin, it may be better to pull both brakes, stall it, and then recover that. I personally did a helicopter and thought, oh right, well I'll do this in the early days of helicopters. Did the helicopter, put both hands up to try and recover it, and all it did was tumble, went over the wing. So I would, if it's proper established flat spin, full stall it, recover the stall. If you're catching it before it's got properly established, just put your hands up on the fly. But it's very difficult, almost, it is difficult to get a glider to a perfectly flat spin. Usually it's got some pitch amplitude in it as well. And if it's got any pitch amplitude in it, just putting your hands up is usually enough to get it flying again. So dropping it, going to and fro, hold solid, when it goes forwards, hands up, and it flies away. With a full-on monster maximum pitch amplitude spin, so it's doing this front to back and spinning round and round and round. It's very, very disorientating. And you literally just wait till the world goes green and put your hands up, or full stall it at any point and recover the full stall. In SIV training now, we don't do the fully established maximum amplitude spin because nobody in their right mind would choose to do that. It's so disorientating. We do or potentially do fully establish a low amplitude, flat spin. We try never to fully establish a helico, other than in acro courses, which I don't do.
I don't know if you're going to touch on it anyway, but you've talked about tracking your observer quite a few times.
Yeah.
And I've seen it in certain videos where people, it starts to fly you down into the ground.
Yeah, coning and downplaning, yeah, that's absolute. Yeah, we'll get to that. Right, so yeah, basically in a spin, you've got to get your hands up and let it fly. If it's in a spiral, you counter the turn and fly it out the spiral. High G in a spiral, low G in a spin.
I've heard that when you chuck your reserve in a spin or something like that, you're supposed to throw it downwards.
I would say no, upwards, because if you throw it down, what your risk is that it ends up there and opens. I've seen it done. This guy's thrown it, it's gone out, down, under him, open, and he's gone straight into it. So I would say throw it up and out. So pull it up.
Maybe I'm thinking of a different circumstance then, but
spiral, you throw it out towards your feet. If you're spiralling in a normal harness, so you're seated, you think, don't towards the feet, so I'm throwing it out from the centre of rotation. In a flat spin, I want it to go as far away from me as possible, so I'm going up at 45 degrees. Make sure you don't throw it into the parachute, into the canopy rather, but yeah, throwing up and away. Death spiral. Any fully established spiral dive, if you hit anything, will almost certainly kill you. So you must pull out. Either throw the parachute, or if necessary, both hands on the outside brake. Get it out of that spiral. It might be that by putting both hands on and push, it stalls. That's fine. You're back into a low G scenario, you can recover the stall. But really, think about your parachute. In a spiral dive, it's going to open really, really quickly. Stall from spiral, if you can do it, it's very physical in the spiral dive. It's hard to physically push the stall, but having got it to stall, suddenly all that G disappears and you're back into a more manageable G situation. So, flat spins, going back to those, we're flying along thermally, around you go. You've got a little bit too much outside brake on, lots too much inside brake on. Just make it go a bit slow, maybe we'll a bit out of trim as well. And suddenly you'll get this skidding on ice sensation. Something's flying, and then whoa, the inside wing just drops back. If you can react really quickly up on that inside initiating brake, the glider will continue to fly. Leave the outside one where it is. If you're not quick enough and it does start spinning, be a little bit cautious about releasing the outside brake. Try not to go fully hands up unless you have to. So the initiating brake come up, but be wary that you don't initiate a full-on face-down spiral. Oops. Try and be quicker, basically. Max spin is the way we're getting the maximum pitch amplitude. We use that to avoid a collision. If someone's trying to kill you, you're flying along, and oh my god, there's a wall of gliders coming at me and there's no room for me to turn normally. It's full speed, 2 wraps, and floor it on one side. Allow the glider to rotate 180, and just before the 180, and both hands up. Flying along, you floor that one brake, it starts to rotate and pitch, it turns, and at that point you let go of the brakes and you fly away in the opposite direction. If you are too slow and hold it on a bit too long, you're going to get a cravat. So your glider will be, instead of there, it's there when you release the brakes and the side slips out, invariably collapsing. So if you ever do it in anger, make sure that you're completely au fait with the 180. Do it too early, you'll get a cravat. Do it too late, you'll get a cravat. But it could save you from hitting somebody. If you get into a fully established one, I mentioned it earlier, where you've got the full pitching and the twisting, and you've held it on for too long, and it's really just going for it rather than that 180. Work is so disorientating. The world's just going blue, green, blue, green, blue, green. You just got to wait till the world is green and put both hands up and fly away. The glider is already pitched forwards. You can let the brakes off and it's not going to do anything aggressive. If you let go when the brakes are back here, when the glider's back here, it's going to come forwards aggressively and you might fall in it. Spin to stall. If you're in that sort of situation where it's all a bit sketchy, you don't really know what you're doing, sometimes the easiest thing to do is to stall it. It's all going to be wrong. One wrap, right the way down, and stall it. Stalling out of spin is usually a lot less dramatic than stalling out of level flight, because already half the glider's not flying. So you're wobbling around madly and everything's going horrible, and then you drop it in the stall and world's back to normal. Off you go again.
What happens if you attempt to beeline stall in those kind of situations? Will it just go horribly wrong?
I think probably yes. Because usually it's your hands that have set it going into this situation. As you put your hands right up to get your beelines, you run the risk of it coming forwards and you falling in it. So let's assume it's all gone horribly wrong, and actually no, we're going to omit defeat and throw a parachute. This is important. Don't pilot the wreckage to the scene of the crash. Yes, you can spend as much time as you like fixing stuff if you're high enough, but always have in mind your hard deck. I mentioned at the beginning. If it's cascading, if it's doing anything really too dramatic, I would say a good 1,000 feet, time to throw a parachute. So, time to throw a parachute, look for the reserve handle. If you see the handle, typically put your thumb in it, grasp it, pop the pins. Now, be familiar with your own harness, they're all different. But most harnesses, it's lift to pop and then out to extract the parachute, modern ones, so it's coming out of a tube underneath you. If you keep trying to pull it out like this, it simply won't come. Okay, so be familiar with the hand motion necessary to get your parachute out of your harness. They're now saying that, after Matt Wilkes' investigation, that the best thing to do if you're anywhere near the ground is you get that parachute handle in your hand, you pop the pins, you pull it out, and you just keep it going and throw and release, all in one move. Don't worry too much about this whole bringing it across your body and throwing it clean and everything else. Just get it out. If you've got plenty of height, then yes, you pull it out, you look around, where's my canopy, and throw it into clean air. Make sure you're not throwing it at the remnants of your other glider, of your main canopy. Once you've thrown it, If you're spiral diving, you try to throw it away from the centre of rotation so that it goes out. It will open very quickly. If you're deep stalling, spiraling or spinning, then as I say, I recommend throwing up at 45 degrees. That's your best chance of not landing in it. Having thrown it, you want it to open. Ideally, you throw it, it opens correct. But let's say it hasn't opened, it's out there, the lines are all streamed, and there's just a package on the end of the lines. Reach out, grab the bridle, and give it a good hard jerk, and release immediately. Because if it does open, it'll take your arm off you just to hold it onto it. So we throw it out. Oh, it's not opened. Grab the bridle, give it a pull, and let go. Hopefully that'll open it. If that hasn't opened it, pull it back in. You might think, right, well, there's nothing wrong with this. Throw it again. Assume it opens, great. If it doesn't, pull it back in. Worst case scenario, you pull it back in, you get it out of the bag, give it a good shake and let it go. Throw it in the airflow.
Sorry for that,
Yeah, you'd be amazed how many people throw in anger at extreme height. They've got plenty of time to fiddle around with the parachute. There's kind of the two scenarios. Either it's you throw and you land, no time to think about anything, or it seems nobody ever throws in the lower 5,000 feet. It's always right up in the outer limits of the atmosphere. So they've got time to read a book, read the instruction manual, but yeah, don't give up. Get the dratted thing out. Once it has deployed, then you're into stopping a downplane, coning. So coning is when your parachute is out here, your main is here, and the two are going round each other. That's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. Downplaning is when your main is out here and your parachute is out here, and you're just hammering down. And depending on the sort of parachute, they can start to both develop a lot of lift and snap lines and things. So you really do have to address that. And what we do is pull on the beelines before it gets into such a bad situation. So as soon as you throw it, as soon as you see your parachute, pull your beelines. That disables, depowers the main, and you should now sit with your main out to the side and your reserve up here. If you've just got a PDA or a sort of non-steerable reserve, that's it, your job is done. Stand up if you're not already out, let's get ready to PLF. You do have limited control. Usually when you've done this, the glider suddenly springs out and it's perfectly glider shaped. You bastard, why didn't you do that before? So you can use differential beelines to twist the glider and then to rotate you and then to turn it back again and then to come off it and let it drive you. You get a real minimal amount of control. You might be able to miss a whale perhaps, but it's not brilliant.
Going back to what you were saying about the beeline stall, Steve, pulling in on the bees when you're trying to control your wing and you've got the reserve above you, that also is very hard work.
Yeah. The one time I've had to do that, I was on a carabiner mounted parachute, which was even more entertaining. So I had to use one hand to hold myself upright, ready to land, and the other hand to try and control the thing. And, Sorry. Who's got a steerable parachute here? Okay. So with steerables, if you've got the height, you can start thinking about engaging the steering. So if you're close to the ground, within 1,000 feet, just leave the brakes where they are, put in the beelines and get ready to land. If you've got plenty of height, you could just under your glide from carabiners and then cut the speed bar lines. Cut the speed bar lines that are on the risers, not the speed bar line that's on the harness. I wouldn't even attempt to undo the brunt hooks unless hopefully most of you haven't got them on anyway, you're replacing the knot. Just cut away the glider, that's the best option. The other option is to gather it in. Pull it in, so you get one line, pull the whole thing in, stick it between your legs. But only do this if you're high, really high, because as you pull the glider into you, while you're in parachute mode coming straight down, you start sending dirty air up to the parachute, and your descent rate will actually increase. I do have a video somewhere of a guy doing just that on a non-steerable parachute. We told him not to pull it in, but he'd seen one too many videos. Oh no, I will pull it in. And he visibly, about 30% increase in speed as he pulled the dirty glider, stuck it in between his legs, and it was just sending this messy air up to the canopy. So yeah, you need height. So you pull the glider in, stick it in between your legs. Our sync rate has accelerated, but you reach up, take your brakes, and then pull down and engage drive, pop the pin. So you pull it down, and a parachute pin comes out, and pop, the back of the canopy opens up, and it starts to go forwards. As soon as it starts going forwards, all that dirty air is now streaming out behind you, and is not affecting your canopy. So your canopy is now gliding, and actually gets a better sync rate than it had to start with when your main was off to the side and it was in clean air. So stuck it between your legs, pop the thing, drive, and we're going fast forwards. Find yourself somewhere to land, turn it into wind, don't flare. If you flare, what you're doing is you're turning it back into a parachute. You lose the forwards drive, and it may actually come down more hard than if you just flown it into wind at its fairly visible forward speed, and just run off or PLF'd off the landing. Always be ready to PLF your landing. Alright.
Sorry, just to go back to non-steerable. So just to stop the glider flying or flying into ground, you're just pulling in the beeline and leaving it out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Don't gather it in because you'll send that dirty air and your sync rate will go up.
Yeah.
That was quite a recent development, wasn't it? I remember you saying last few years where people stopped gathering in and then did the beeline thing.
It's well over 10 years since we stopped doing that.
Well, there's been a conversation from a long time ago then.
Yeah.
I think one of your close competitors recommends pulling it 2 years ago.
Yeah. Just video. As soon as that paraglider gets into the starts sending its disturbed air to the canopy, your sync rate goes up. You go down faster.
Makes sense.
Yeah. The other thing is leaving the glider out to the side, especially with the PDA. PDAs want to oscillate all the time, and having the glider out there acts as a bit of an anchor, a bit of a tether, and it does definitely reduce the oscillation. If you, on a PDA, if you cut away your main, you'll find you're wobbling around much more than you were before. And was it PowerPoint magazine did some tests, and the problem with the PDAs was not their absolute sync rate, it was that you were swinging to and fro, and so you're coming to land and swung down into the ground at the wrong moment. So having the glider off the side does definitely reduce that.
What makes them want to go down then and pull you down?
If you've got your main out here and your canopy up here, and you've thrown the parachute, the main is starting to, if the parachute is not big enough especially, you're descending and the paraglider is starting to generate lift, so it pulls you off to the side. That then allows air to come out the side of a PDA, which makes it want to go that way, which makes it go down faster, which makes this generate more lift, which pulls it out, and they can go sort of like that, that kind of speed, and yeah, you'll come down at quite extreme, can be quite extreme speeds.
So if it's out to the side and it seems to be alright, just leave it.
Yeah, but be ready to beeline it. Because, we had a guy, a Dutch instructor, who threw over the village in Beer. He was playing silly games and doing stalls and stuff, and got it on through the parachute. And it was coming down fine, with its sack just out to the side, coming down, and kind of building height, 4 or 5 story building height. Suddenly you saw it start to evolve into a down plane, and yeah, he hit the ground, broke his back, and generally messed himself up. If he'd been at least ready on the beelines, then as soon as it started to do, they go, oh no, you don't. would have landed safely.
Is it something you could use deliberately to get down quickly? So
Yes.
you chuck your reserve,
Yes.
do some downplaning for a little while, beeline it for the last bit.
You could, but you just got to be careful because you might find it downplaning with such force that you then can't pull the beelines.
So if you were to do it, you do it in steps.
I think so, yeah.
Just like do a bit, pull it in, do a bit, pull it in.
Yeah, be cautious.
Yeah. What kind of speeds are we talking about when we're downplaning?
Downplaning,
It's a fully developed downplane.
60 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour.
Oh, really? That's incredible.
Yeah. There was a team of sort of acro parachutist people doing it with paragliders called the Dirty Dogs. And they got a piece of rope, tied it between each other, tied two pilots together with it, and then turned it into a downplane. Flew down until the rope snapped. Quite what rope it was, I don't know, but you know, timber and nylon or something, polyprop. Big loads involved. You don't want to do that.
Yeah. V squared.
Yeah. And that's that. 3 questions, if anybody wants them. What is the answer to life, the universe, and everything?
I guess my question is, what would we practice here safely?
What can you practice here safely?
Yeah.
It depends what you've done already.
No SIV. I'm kind of thinking of the red ribbonish planets.
Yeah. So single 2-line big ear. A big ear. A 2-line big ear. Get familiar with the sort of the larger non-deflations, and a lot of this can be done on the ground. It doesn't even have to be flying. It's much safer done on the ground. What else? Spiral entry and exit. So just gently wind it up. You know, don't aim for face down for years. Just slowly building up the energy. In, one turn, out. You don't really want to be practicing beelines in the air until you're thousands and thousands of feet high and need them. It's needless.
But what ground handling is that fine?
Ground handling, yes. But what you'll find with ground handling is often you pull the beeline. So yes, you can pull it and establish what it does. If you pull it just a little bit, sometimes you can depower them and you can hold it above your head. And you can also do that with the back risers. So you can use that to walk down the hill and back up the hill when it's a bit breezy. If you've landed perhaps in not the best possible place, you want to walk a bit, use your back or B risers to get to a place that you're more comfortable putting the glider down. What you'll find if you beeline the glider on the ground, most wings, when they're properly beelined, will come down and they'll sit about 5 or 6 feet above the ground, and you're a bit stuck. Because then you're got half a galley, you've got the glider 6 feet off the ground, the beelines are in, now what do I do? That aspect I wouldn't beeline it to the ground. Use back risers. Familiarisation with spin on the ground, stall on the ground, certainly it all helps. Relative safety.
I found playing with the stall point, it's about 2 or 3 feet above the ground when I can get to landing, that's proving quite useful.
Yeah.
It is no higher than I'm prepared to fall.
Yeah. Doing it when you're doing a slope landing in particular, because in a slope landing you can be stood upright, maintaining 2 feet, 3 feet off the ground, finding the stall point. Oh yeah, there it is. Remember, of course, in the stall, it's 2 things. It's not just the amount of brake you pull; it's the amount of brake you pull and how long you hold it on for. You can put your arms all the way down here and put them back up again. In that sort of time scale, and the glider is going to wobble and flies off. You're going to put it down and let the glider slow down. Put it down and let it slow down. Put it down and let it slow down.
I found I could feel it in the pressure of the brakes. Once the pressure starts softening, it's beginning to stall again.
Yeah. Some gliders will vibrate and tell you that you're getting close to the stall.
Really?
Yeah. Particularly when you're thermaling, you've got the ends and you can feel it wants to go faster.
I've got a question.
Buff it. Yeah.
Does paragliding make you more sexually attractive to women?
No.
I don't know what that wants to look at that. Not even a little bit.
Probably less so. Probably the opposite.
Depends what your starting point is, Paul.
John Terzak said there were no silly questions, but I'm not sure that's true, is it?
I'm sure you can think of one.
Yeah. What happens when it rains? Just call me a twat later.
No. So if you glide it near enough, it beads up on the outer surface and the stall speed increases. You know that.
I've flown in the rain, I think, caught out a couple of times.
The other one that happens when it rains is all water runs down to the trailing edge of your glider, down the brake lines,
and down the back of your neck.
And down your sleeves.
Yeah. Yeah, you get wet's the usual answer, isn't it?
Alright, are we all done?
I think so. We probably need to let Dave get away as well.
Yes.
Firstly, thank you to Steve for giving up this evening to explain an awful lot. Demetrius, we're in your hands so we can watch it again and understand it the second time around.
Just edit all the rubbish out. We have a nice 6-second video.